Hello, and welcome back to another video. Today, I'm going to show you how to add Swagger documentation to your existing Rust REST API. Now, if you don't have an existing project, I have some starter code that I'll link to in the description. If you haven't encountered Swagger documentation before, it is a third-party integration that allows you to quickly and easily describe your API. This includes your endpoints, what information they are expecting, what information they're returning, as well as giving you the ability to make test calls to the individual routes. This can be especially handy when you're working on a team and you need to easily communicate what information is expected between the backend and the front end. For this demonstration, we'll be utilizing the Utopia crate. Currently on version 3.3, we are using the Actix extras features because we are using an Actix web API, and the chrono feature because we are utilizing the chrono crate for a specific date time. The Utopia Swagger UI crate is what generates the actual documentation from the code. Let's get started. Over on our main.rs, we're going to import a few things from the crates. Firstly, from Utopia, we are going to import the OpenAPI security pieces. These will allow us to send authorization headers to our routes in our test calls. HTTP auth scheme, HTTP builder, and security scheme. We will also need modify, OpenAPI, and toSchema. From the Utopia Swagger UI, we will need to import the Swagger UI. The first of these pieces that we are going to utilize is the toSchema. So what this does is it takes a struct like what we have here. We have token claims, and it has a ID, which is an I32. This descriptor allows the Swagger documentation to read the struct and build a front-end UI description of it. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to come down to where our HTTP server is being built. And just above that, we are going to describe our API documentation as well as implement our security add-ons for the basic auth and bearer auth. So first, we are going to derive OpenAPI, and then we are going to create an OpenAPI document with the following paths. You can see down here we have basic auth, create user, and create article. So those are what we're going to pass in here. And they are located in our services file. So we are going to have to specify services, create user, services, basic auth, and services create article. Next, we're going to specify our components. So for now, all that we have imported into this file, or not imported, but built in this file, is the token claims that I just added the toSchema to. So we are going to add in token claims right here. Now this is erroring because we don't actually have the information that the OpenAPI API documentation needs for the routes. So before we do that, we are going to come down here, create a struct that is called API doc, and then below that, we are going to specify our security add-on. We're going to create another struct called security add-on, implement a modify trait on it. And the function itself is going to take self open API, and this is and mute utoipa open API let components equals openapi.components dot as mutable, and unwrap it. Components dot add security schema. So this is how we will be actually specifying what security schemes our API documentation has. And this first one will be bearer auth. We are going to use the security scheme HTTP builder new dot scheme HTTP auth scheme bearer. So that's a enum, and then specify the bearer token format, and in this case it is a JWT, and build it. So that takes care of our bearer auth. Next, we are going to specify our basic auth. Add security scheme basic auth. And we are going to use the basic auth enum value. So security scheme HTTP builder new dot scheme HTTP auth scheme basic, and build that. So that takes care of our security scheme, security add-on creation. Now, in order to use that, we will need to add it to our OpenAPI doc building up here as a modifier, and pass in the reference. If we come down below the security add-on, we're going to create a new variable called OpenAPI, and it is going to be a OpenAPI document. So we're utilizing the struct that we created, API doc, and we are going to call OpenAPI, and there we go. Now, in order for our server to actually serve this up in the browser, we're going to come down here below app data. We are going to add a new service, Swagger UI new, and then this will be the endpoint for the actual documentation. Swagger UI, that's the base route. In the document itself, it will append to the URL information based on whatever you're currently viewing. So if you're viewing a post user route, it will show that in the URL. And in order for that to occur, we are going to add this little piece of regex here. Next, we need to add a URL. This is your API doc can have multiple schemas described in it, and this gives you a way to specify which one you're currently using, or to switch through them. But in this case, we'll only have one, so we'll only have one URL. This will be API docs, openapi.json, and then openapi.clone, so that it knows that it's using this doc, this API doc that we specified, as opposed to another document that we could have created. All right, so that takes care of the initial setup for the Swagger documentation. Let's go over into our services file. In our services file, the only thing that we need to import from Utoipa is toSchema. So use Utoipa and toSchema specifically. Now you can see here that we have a number of different structs created. Now we're going to make most of them describable. So first, for create user body, we specify toSchema, and now we are actually going to do something new. We're going to specify an example of what this username value should be, as well as specify that it is required for an API call that requires this create user body. So this will only require it through the API documentation. It doesn't actually impact your normal route's performance, but this is useful for preventing user error in the documentation itself. So we utilize the schema descriptor, and we are going to pass in an example. In this case, we'll just pass in John Doe and specify that it is required. So required equals true. We're going to do the same thing for password, password 123, and specify required equals true. For user no password, we are going to describe this ID as an integer. So an example would be 1. For the username, we'll make this example John Doe, and that takes care of that one. For auth user, we won't worry about that because that is an internal struct that is only used in this file. For the create article body, we will describe that one. This is going to be another string. Example, we'll say my first article, and this is required to generate an article. For the content, we'll say this is my first article. And we will leave that optional, actually. toSchema for article, this is the last struct. Again, example equals 1, and this is a return type. So this is why we are not specifying required or optional. Example equals my first article. Content example equals this. This is my first article. Published by. So in this case, it will be a user ID. So we'll just say 1. And schema for the published on is a date time, and that will be formatted as such. 2023-09-16 T143810 point whatever. Okay, and that's how you describe your structs and your data types. First up, we have this post user route. Just above the Actix decorator that specifies this is a post route, we are going to add a utoipa decorator that describes the route and creates an entry in the documentation. So for this one, it is expecting a request body that is structured as this create user body. And the user can expect the following responses. So this is a tuple of tuples. The first one, status 200. The user can expect a new user to be created. So create a new user as a description. And the return body is going to be that user no password. So just a ID and a username. The user can also expect a status of 500, and this indicates that there was an internal server error. And that's all that you need to do to describe this route. Next, for the basic auth route, we are going to use that utoipa path again. It doesn't take a request body, so we don't need to specify that. A user can reasonably expect a status of 200. The description for this route is going to be login using credentials, and this returns a bearer token. And the return body will be that token claims. Next, in order to use this route, the user has to send a basic auth header. So we are going to return a 401 if that is not present, and the description for this return will be basic auth required. And lastly, we are also going to expect that a 500 can be returned, and that again is an internal server error. Now, in order to get the basic auth or the bearer auth to work in the API documentation, you have to specify here that this route is going to use a security schema. And earlier in main.rs, we created this bearer auth and this basic auth one. So these are the names that you will use to specify which schema to use. So in this case, it's using a basic auth, and this just equals an empty array or vector. And that's it for this route. Lastly, we're going to describe the create article route. So again, utoipa path. Again, this one takes a request body, create article body. For its responses, It is going to send back a 200 if it's successful. Create a new article, and the body that is returned will be an article. Status equals 400, sorry, 401 if the bearer auth header is not sent, because it is required. And status 500 description equals internal server error. Again, since this one is security locked, we need to specify which security it's using. And in this case, it is the bearer auth security schema. And that takes care of the API, the routes. If we go back to the main.rs, you can see that this is no longer erroring, because these are now returning paths because they are properly documented and they are good to go. So lastly, before we fire it up, right now we are only showing the user the description for the token claims, but since there are multiple structs that are used, we want to come up here, import the remaining structs that we described. So create article body, create user body, user no password, and article. And then we go back down. Where is it? We add these to the schema. User no password, article, create article body, and create user body. Now, if we come to our terminal, if we run this, then we come back over to our web browser, and I will reload this because this is no longer the solution code. We can see that we have our various routes. So we have post article, get auth, which is the basic auth route, and post user. Down here we see our various schemas that we specified. So article, create article body, so on. It shows the pieces here. So content, which is a string, and along with an example, ID, published by, published on is the date time, and string. And then so on and so forth through all of these. If we come up here to first, we need to create a user. So our example, password 123, username John Doe. We see here that we should expect a 200 if everything goes right, and it'll return back a user object with ID and username. Execute. And we can see it does just that. So it returned an ID of 3 and username John Doe. Now, if we come up to our basic auth, we can click this little lock right here. It brings us into here. Now we enter our username and our password. Hit authorize, close this, and now that will send a basic auth header to our API route. Try it. We're expecting a 200 and for it to return a bearer token that includes an ID in the payload. We see that we've received a JWT bearer token. Let's copy that. We will come over to article, click on the lock, and this time, since it's using the bearer auth schema, we are just going to paste in the bearer token that we've just received. Click authorize. Try out. We are expecting a 200 and it'll return back the information of the article. So content ID, published by, published on, and title. If we don't send the bearer auth, we should receive a 401. And if something goes wrong, we'll receive 500. So we'll just use this, our example. This is my first article. We are expecting it to return back published by as 3. And let's do this. And there we go. We have an ID of 2. Title, my first article, published by 3. And there you have it. I hope you found this video useful, and I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.